Hey guys, welcome to Blackbird. So, on today's edition of What the Hell Are Y'all Talking About? Just kidding. Today's edition of Blackbird, we're going to be talking about the Daughters of the Confederacy or the United Daughters of the Confederacy. They have names. We're just going to call them the Daughters of Confederacy. So, we're going to be talking about them today. I'm here as always. Hey, Megan. Elizabeth is here with us, and so is Micah. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. Real quick, let's do some housekeeping.
Hey, so we have a Facebook group that Megan moderates. There's a link in the description. So if you hop on there and you can ask Megan questions or comments or whatever you have. Also in this description is a couple links to articles that we looked at, a shortish Vox video about a similar thing. So check that out too for further information.
More stuff. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Oh, sorry again. My bad. All right. So, for those of you who don't know, and just a brief overview, the Daughters of the Confederacy were started in like the I feel like it was 50s.
18, or officially 1894.
1894. Whoa, I was way off.
I only know because it said September 10th, 1894, and I thought it said 1984, and I was like, wait, because it's around
and so this was a group of women who were dedicated to seemingly promoting the heritage of the South. But as we have all learned during our research, it's a little more sinister than just being like commemorating our dead ancestors. So, there, not mine. Anyway, sorry. So that's what that's what their goal was. But we're going to talk about the things that they were actually responsible for. So, Elizabeth, also, we're going to do this a little differently because this is kind of what I want to say. This is a white woman issue, obviously. So, there are no black people who are members of the Daughters of Confederacy. So I'm going to let Elizabeth and Micah do a lot of the talking about this because I feel like it's worth that. I feel also better to see someone white talk about some things that other white people are doing rather than for me to tell you guys why it's wrong. You can listen to other white people tell you why it's wrong. So let's go.
So yeah, I started to jump in and interrupt you and say, yes, like it is funny. Like as far as I'm aware, there are no black members of the UDC. So already, like, yeah. So I kind of wanted to like lay the foundation anyway for like what, because it's like they promote, these are the things they promote. But what does that mean? They promote the lost cause myth, which is like a series of stories and myths, and it's not like I have it condensed in 6 bullet points that I think are like the basic overview. I pulled from an article at battlefields.org, which seems to be a pretty good resource, but I think it's probably like way expanded from what I've just read, but it's important because what it is like a reframing of the Civil War as like what they call it, the War of Northern Aggression or the war between the states, to like try and justify the seceding that started the war, all of that. So, because importantly, people will tell you, I've had people tell me, oh, it's not about, it wasn't started over slavery. It wasn't just about slavery, which I'll give you like, maybe there were a couple of points. They're still related to slavery though. Their main goal is upholding slavery because that's that was their livelihood. And I mean, I'd say they probably didn't see any other way they could possibly sustain their life. People do that a lot. Humans are like that. Like, we can't possibly do it any other way, right?
This is the way we've always done it.
Yeah. Change has never happened or been successful. Okay, so point 1, secession. Yeah, this is that it's not about slavery. It was secession and protecting the rights and the homes, and to throw off the shackles of tyrannical government. I'm gonna need like specific examples of how it's tyrannical, other than telling you can't own people anymore. I think, let's see. So that's number 1. 2 is part 1A. Northerners started it by agitating for an end to slavery, which was going to end naturally anyway. Like, it was already going to happen. They just, riled everybody up. Those pesky Northerners. I cannot believe they're making me defend Northerners. And also, yeah, the Northern industrialism, like, sort of encroaching on their farm agrarian lifestyle. Like, so yes, they're encroaching on our Southern way of life. Point 2, slavery was good. Enslaved people were happy to be enslaved. They were docile and loyal to the people who kept them. And also slaveholders were good to their slaves. And let's see, this kept them protected. Gave them, that's, their natural state, right? So let's see. Yeah, I pulled a quote from this article too. I didn't write down who said it. Slavery, subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. I do not see how anyone could argue that is not a white supremacist point of view. And then, yes, so now all of these formerly enslaved people were just out on the streets. They were unprepared for freedom. And so that's the other thing, is like, that's why the North is so wrong in doing this, is they just freed everybody all at once and they didn't know what to do, right? 3, the Confederacy's superior skill in battle was just overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of Northern officers. Like, if they'd been evenly matched and like the number of people fighting, totally would have won. It's just they were mostly overwhelmed. They weren't defeated, they were overwhelmed. And let's see, 4, like, they get shorter. 4 is that the Confederate soldiers are portrayed as heroic and saintly, which, I mean, like, yeah, we're all familiar with that. I feel like it's like they're held up. I feel like even people who say, like, well, no, like, what they were fighting for, they felt like they were fighting for their families, and that's fine, but that doesn't require you to elevate them to saintly. I'm getting into editorializing now. 5, somehow Robert E. Lee is his own bullet point, but he's like the symbol of the lost cause. And then 6 is that Southern women supported and sacrificed for the cause. And yeah, we're way more devoted to their cause than the Northern women were, or would ever have been. And the image of a pure, saintly, white Southern woman sort of emerged from this. So, yeah. So that's just like, that's one tenet, but that's kind of, I feel like, the foundation of like how the daughters kind of got more into, because yeah, I think we talked about, like, they were claiming like they're taking care of their elderly Confederate soldiers and all that, but then like once those men all died, then like they turned their attention on like putting up monuments to these people and doing all this other stuff. I think that was part of the plan all along, but it's, I think that's still hiding behind the like, oh, we're women, we're taking care of our family and our heritage. And I feel like I had more points from that, but I'm not sure what. Just I went off on a tangent, and now I'm lost. I'm unmoored.
So, Micah, if you want to come back, you can go, and if you like,
yeah, I'm sure it'll come back to me.
I think one of the interesting things is the way that the daughters of the Confederacy have portrayed themselves, and continue to portray themselves. Like it's 2021 and they have a website. And it goes back to what Elizabeth was saying, is that when they started, they were just a group of women who were helping at the hospitals and helping widows and knitting circles. It's just a group of women who came together to help each other. And that's, according to them, is how it started. But this whole lost cause rhetoric is really the agenda that they were pushing. Currently, if you go to their website, they do have a statement, which I think is interesting, about like the Confederacy itself, and then like the Confederate flag. And basically what they're saying is that they denounce anyone who promotes racial promote racial divisiveness or white supremacy. I can't say that word. And we call on these people to cease using Confederate symbols for their abhorrent and reprehensible purposes, which I think is really fascinating, that they're trying to separate this idea of the Confederacy and the Confederate flag from these people who are using it racially. And they're like, but that is literally the symbol. Like, you can't divorce these two things.
Right.
But the front page is very much about, like, we don't support that, and that's not what the Confederacy is about. And then there's like another section of the website where they like give scholarships to students who help research Confederate, I don't even know. And they do all these good things. And it's fascinating because you can't separate these things. Like they're one and the same. But they certainly try.
And I think that like that's, again, you talk about like the lost cause rhetoric, right? And that's been so it's this culture, right? It's this thing. And like, even I think I was reading something while we were doing this, and that like this whole rhetoric and what the Daughters of the Confederacy have done, and the movie, what it was, the movie called the something America, whatever, came out. Anyway, there's a movie. It's racist. It was put in the White House. I don't remember the name of it.
Oh, Birth of a Nation.
The Birth of a Nation. So that movie also was like founded on all of this this lost cause rhetoric, and then there's a movie, and because of all of that, there are people who genuinely believe that is true, and that the lie is what we hear, right? We hear the lie that it was about slavery, and the thing that they know is the truth. And it's hard to combat that, especially because it's so prevalent, and because there are groups like this out there and other groups who are perpetuating the myth, right? And I think a lot of it too, when you guys were talking and we are like doing some research, and I found some stuff that the Daughters of the Confederacy went into schools, and like at the point when this was happening, they were all white schools. So they went into all white Southern schools and taught children this myth about the war. And so they're raised with this myth. They pass it on to their children, and so then it becomes like, you know, this is truth. Like, I learned it. Your grandpa says, well, this is what I learned in school, and it was closer to the time that it actually happened, so it must be true, even though you learned the exact opposite of this in school 50 years later. Right?
So I think interesting, like so the Daughters of the Confederacy have this idea, they have this lost cause, and how do you change how they remember the war? How do you change the outcome of the war and make it sound like you're actually the good guys and you were doing the right thing? And one of that is going into schools. So initially they went in and they put in like pictures of Confederate heroes. They put in Confederate flags, like anywhere and everywhere they could get in the door, they were doing this. And then they turned to textbooks. So like not just going in and telling children stories, but like literally putting it in their textbooks, which is it went from like 1920 to 1970, so like several generations, or maybe not quite that early, but some like 2 or 3 generations of people who were learning about the Northern aggression and states' rights. That's maybe why your grandpa's a little crazy, if you have a crazy grandpa.
You've got that one family member. Like, that's probably why.
But they petitioned states, and they talked to like textbook makers, like publishers, and they pushed their textbooks. And sort of like some states, I'm not going to say forced, because I think some states were they were totally all in. They were like, yes, this is the ideal South that I want children to learn. So it wasn't that hard of a sell. But they got into like one of their people wrote one of the textbooks. They had people who were sitting like in government offices. Like they really got into it. I think they like partnered up with the like the male version, the veterans of something. And they were just like they went for it, and it worked really well.
Actually, so one thing I was reading, and this is specific to the Lost Cause, not the daughters so much, but I mean, why did this get so? Was this so widely accepted by everyone? And part of it is apparently because in the aftermath of the Civil War, it kind of helped to reconcile North and South, for the North not to like come in and say, no, like that's not what happened. Like they just kind of let the South put this out and believe this. And I think the fact that they didn't say anything helped the two, sides reconcile in the short term. But yeah, I mean, in the long term, it has been harmful.
One of the articles was talking about like textbooks publishers, like what do we do? Do we publish this like watered down, incorrect version of the textbook, or do we have 2 separate textbooks, like one essentially from the North and one for the South? And they decided that it would be easier to publish 2 different sets of textbooks, which I didn't realize. So like half the country is learning one thing and the other, like it's really intense.
That's nuts.
Yeah, that's another thing they didn't think through. What happens when 2 regions of the country learned a totally different history?
Yeah.
Well, I think too, like we were talking about, and that's like something that I was looking at about like, so like they did the textbooks, and they're responsible for a lot of the memorials and school names and around the South for putting them up. And they did this. They're a nonprofit group, so they had bake sales and they did these things that you're like, oh, like I'm supporting a good cause. I'm just buying a brownie from Susan. Sorry, my friend Susan, I don't mean. But like I'm just buying a brownie from, at a bake sale. And maybe there, to some degree, people were not aware of where that money was going to eventually end up. But I thought that was really interesting. And then, like, in the wake of all of the, these monuments being removed, like I saw when I was reading, a lot of people were like, you don't see the daughters like out, like, hey, we put that up, stop it. But they are fighting this secret lawsuit war against people taking all of these things down. So I was reading here. So Vanderbilt University had a Confederate Memorial Hall on their at the campus, and the Tennessee division sued for breach of contract because they helped raise the money to build the hall. So when the university decided to change the name, they sued, and they won. So in 2016, they won the lawsuit about $1.2 million, the current value of the 55,000 donation they made towards the construction of the dormitory back in 1935. And so that's kind of how, like, you don't see it, right? We're not hearing about the daughters fighting for these statues, but they are waging this sort of secret lawsuit war against bringing these monuments down. But I thought it was also kind of funny that like they've been doing this, and I forget which one I said it in, but one of the counties or whatever was like, fine, like we would rather pay you the money and take this down than leave it up. I was like, good for you guys.
Point out that like this isn't a couple of statues. This is statues, like tons of them for one, and all over the place. So if there is like a Robert E. Lee statue by you, like chances are the Daughters of the Confederacy had something to do with it. Like they're just, and it got them into sort of interesting places, like as public as possible, so public parks, and then if they could do it outside, like a city hall or a courthouse or like anything like government wise, they tried as hard as possible to put as many up as they could. And the other interesting thing I think about it is like these weren't constructed like 10 years after the war. There was a rash of like statues being put up in the 1920s, 1930s, and then another rash in like the 60s and the 70s, which coincides with the 50-year anniversary and the 100-year anniversary, but also coincides with like Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and then the Civil Rights Movement.
Yeah, and so one of the articles that that first rash was right before World War I. There was a huge rash of them putting up these monuments, which I think is really it's just cringy. It's cringy. It's like
Yeah.
Anyway.
So if somebody is like, complaining about that statue and how much history it has, like chances are it's actually not that old. It wasn't necessarily like this is like where this person lived or where they died. Like they just wanted to slap a Robert E. Lee up in the park.
It's an intimidation technique, and I just realized I get to use my favorite, I don't know if it's an analogy or metaphor, I should know. No. But yes, like, yes. Should this stuff be taught? I would argue this should be taught like more in depth. Should it be in a museum? Probably. But when you put a statue up to something, you're commemorating it, you're elevating it. And so it's like, that was my thing. It's like, there's a reason that I don't put like the photos from my first wedding up in my home. Like, yeah, that was a thing I thought was the right thing at the time. That's part of my history. I can talk about it, but I'm not putting memorials up so everyone can see it. Like when you memorialize something, yeah, you are saying it's not just about history. It's really elevating something to a position of something you really believe in.
Yeah. Well, like that's my favorite thing when people are like, "Yeah, it's our history," and I'm like, "Have you been to Germany? There are no monuments to Nazis around Germany. None. You know why? Because it was wrong, and they lost, and it was wrong. They don't put monuments of them up because it was wrong."
That's how this lost cause rhetoric was so successful, that people are like, that's part of my history and I'm really proud of it. And like, I think most of us are like, should you be though? But like, they're so involved in this like Southern Confederate flag thing.
Yeah.
Right. And I wonder too if that's because I remember seeing something about how like they also help perpetuate like gender roles in Southern society. And just lost my thought, because the other thing, what I was thinking before that is like the reason too that this is so insidious is it's just kind of like, this is my favorite thing to talk about with people, is like how like white supremacy is in culture in ways that nobody even thinks about. And even this is pretty blatant, but like it's in everything. And to have it pointed out is not to, I mean, it's not a like value judgment on, I mean, at this point, this is like, there are lots of things that I like, I haven't even thought of yet, that, but when it occurs to you, like, oh, this is born of white supremacy, but it's something that's so everyday, and so invisible, that like when you tell people that, white people generally, a lot of them are gonna go, oh no, like you're being crazy, like that's that's not what it's about, or that's not what I believe, so it's fine. But yeah, I don't remember what I was going to say about gender roles at all. But I guess.
Well, and I think too, like that's sort of like that, like when you have white women perpetuating this myth, right? Of not, like in the early days of like, slaves being submissive and like willing to and wanting to, right? So then like, and then when you see violence against white women, you're like, but they've been so helpful. They were just trying to help these slaves, these people do these things. And when that gets so like ingrained, right? Then when you hear about violence against white women, that's why we see it on the news, right? Because everyone's like, but these poor white women, they were just trying to help. But that's a lot of where this stuff comes from, is from the Daughters of the Confederacy. And like we're just trying to help. We're doing the right thing. We're preserving our heritage. We're looking after our men. We're taking care of our children. Like we're doing all of these things to support our community. And so for someone to come in and convince like acts of violence against us, like we are heroes. Right? That's, I think, part of where this myth comes from, right?
Well, and I think I remembered what I was going to say. It wasn't gender roles. It was just family. Like the Southern idea of family too is like that you are so connected to your ancestors. But I personally don't identify with this feeling, and I don't understand why it's so strong for some people, because absolutely the relatives that I know and knew and grew up with that were kind people, like I just haven't had like an abundance of shitty people that I was exposed to anyway in my family. So maybe that's part of it, but I feel like if you go a couple of generations back, I don't know, I feel like it's also maybe born of like people being afraid they'll be forgotten or something. But like, I don't know, if you have like an ancestor who was a serial killer, do you then like say like, oh, but he was my great great uncle? Like, I don't like, why, I don't understand why it's so important to some people to identify with people that far back when they did the wrong thing. Like, you can acknowledge that they didn't know they were doing the right thing, maybe, but it doesn't have to go farther than that. Like, people are learning and growing all the time.
I think it's even easier now to be like, my great 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 grandpa fought in the Civil War and he was a terrible human being, because you didn't know that guy. You have no connection. It's actually easier to be like, that was messed up, instead of like holding on to whatever pride in family.
Yeah, I don't like, yes, finding out that anyone, I'm sure someone I'm related to did fight for the South. I don't know enough of my family history to know. But yeah, it's like, wouldn't really change my opinion for like, oh, suddenly I see it the way the South sees it. Like, suddenly I'm on board. But yeah, I don't know. I did like some DNA several years ago, and I just checked up on it this last weekend, because apparently, like, the nice thing is, like, do more research and you get to actually learn. You don't have to pay a second time to learn more. But yeah, I'm just like, I'm like, generally my feeling is like, that's interesting. Like, where they came from, that's interesting, I guess, kind of. Mine's not that interesting, but like, yeah, so I know like what my makeup is, and I know like sort of some like 4 generations, but you know, it's cool, but it doesn't define me, and I don't feel like I'm abandoning my history by I
I'm
don't
not
get
putting up a monument.
I don't get yeah, because that's the other thing. It's like they're not even that's like one guy. It's not most of those people, it's not a monument to their ancestors. It's some guy they're not even related to. But anyway, I feel like we've got off topic, but yeah, it's
But I think it's also like when we were talking about like education wise. So you're also talking about like socialite, elite, white women who are probably teaching, right?
mhm,
Like some of them are teachers. And so then I think that feeds into all of the other things we're talking about. Like so then this myth is now like it's not just infecting like a history book, it's infecting all of the students and the entire structure of the school, right? Which is probably where you get a whole lot of, not probably, some of the backlash, right, from integrating schools probably comes from this foundation that they've laid, right? These, the daughters of the Confederacy, some are probably teachers. They're in there, they're teaching these things. They may or may not know that they're wrong, but now they have to, they've like it's been ingrained in them all of these thoughts, and now they have to teach Black kids these things, right? And it's like that's where I think I would say like that's gotta cause some like pushback in your brain and in your feelings about things, right? You'd be a nut if it didn't make you think about it at all. um, so I think I don't know. It's been really interesting. I felt like it's like not super easy to find, and which I think speaks to what a great job these women are doing because it was not easy to find this information, right? It wasn't the first thing that popped up in the Google search. I had to scroll down.
I think they've been really smart, probably the entire time they've existed, but they don't make statements like public, on the record to a newspaper statements,
well,
which is really smart on their part.
they have learned not to put anything in writing after the declarations of causes from meetings.
So, I think that's that. Anything else? Anything interesting we would like to add to this?
There was when you were talking about Nazis, I was so the Daughters of the Confederacy also had like youth groups, like after school clubs.
Yeah.
Where they would like children would come and they would memorize some of like the lost cause tenets, and they would get prizes for however much they could recite. And when I was reading it, I was like, oh, Nazis.
Yeah.
This
yeah. Very effective.
Yeah, it's super. Like adults, I think, once you get a majority, it's over. But with kids, if you start young enough, they never know. And they grow up to adults who are like, that didn't happen.
Yeah. That's not what I learned in school.
I could, like, there are literally libraries full of shit I didn't learn in school.
School's not everything. Do your own research.
Exactly. Do your own research. You should go back to the library, man. Hopefully go to the library more. So, I guess that being said, that's our little bit on the Daughters of the Confederacy. Hope you learned something. If you know anyone who's a member, go talk to them. See what they have to say about some of this stuff. Could be interesting conversation. Anyways, that's our video. Oh, before we leave, I'm going to be putting up on Facebook like an open-ended questions. So at some point in the future, we're going to do a video where you guys ask us questions or have posted questions, and we're going to respond to them. So if you think of a question, get on the Facebook group, type it up. I will not respond to you. I will just let you know that I saw it, and we will answer the question here in video when we get enough of them. So that's all I got there. Yeah. So we'll see you next time. This has been Blackbird. As always, don't be a racist and wash your hands.